Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to talk about private auras raiding the race to world first, and how Blizzard has kind of lost, in my opinion, the war on Weakauras. Now, it's gone on for quite a while where there's been frustration about like Weakauras playing the game for you, and rightfully so, where Weakauras felt like they were a mandatory to be able to actually kill certain bosses, or at least just not have a hellish time progressing on encounters. And as a result of this, Blizzard had put in private auras. So this is back in late October, really, where they adjusted a number of mechanics to do private auras. So if you don't know what these are, basically all spells related to the mechanics are private auras, where you are not able to mark in an aura to be able to like set aside assignments when you are affected by these debuffs. This is the same thing that happened on the Echo of Neltharion, where if you're affected by Volcanic Heart, you're not having the weak aura telling you necessarily where to go and how to be able to play around it. And so as a result, they built out a list weak aura so that they prioritized and they noticed who was actually affected by this aura. You're on a list, and then first on the list goes here, fifth on the list goes there, and that's how they organized the mechanic to deal with it. Now, when they're adding these private auras, notably, we're going to focus on Flamebound, Shadowbound, and Seeking Inferno from Smolderon. All of these mechanics have had workarounds being built into them from macro mechanics. And so what these macros are doing is when you are affected by something, like as you can see from my own Smolderon progression right here, when you're affected by the Seeking Inferno, the orb targets you. You can see the little marker onto my head. But there's a macro that you have to hit. And so the first person right there, IKTB, then hits their macro instantly, and I am soon afterwards. So I was the second person to hit my macro, and then I'm built out into this list. And all it is just a quick macro, which tells the weak aura, hey, I have this debuff. And then as a result, it sets up a list based off who has hit their macro. And that's how that first orb goes off, because they're the first one who selected it, and they go ba-boom. After that, I am second up on the list. I collide with it, and then it goes boom. And then you're able to sort out who is dealing with these mechanics in turn based off you sending information to that weak aura. It could be anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be, hey, I have, Seeking Inferno on me. It could be, I have, aura number 1, and it just sorts it as a result and then builds out a list for you to be able to decide who has these mechanics. And that's how they're able to sort it each round. The same thing is going on right now for the World First race with the Flamebound mechanic. Now, what this does is it goes through, just like this is from my own heroic, so I'm not yoinking any of the footage from the Race to World First gamers, but definitely be checking them out. When you go into this first round of Corrupt, the boss is going to be channeling into the heart of Amirdrassil, and you have to soak these orbs. Now, in Mythic, what you have is either Flame or Shadow orbs. And so each player is marked by Flame or Shadow. And what you'll see in the Race to World First is having those Flame and Shadow orbs coming in, and players are then hitting their macro if they are Fire, or they're hitting their macro, or they're not hitting their macro if they're Shadow. A similar priority list is built out that sorts players in a semicircle around the boss, telling them where they need to be able to go. That's the key function of it, and it's not specific to, this is the absolute fire debuff that's now a private aura. It could just be any aura that they're telling the weak aura that they have, and you either have it, hit the aura, or you don't, and you don't select it, and then it gives you a priority list on where you want to go so that players are going to be able to organize themselves. And so this is the primary reason why I would say that Blizzard has lost the war on weak auras, is that when mechanics like this exist, just by their very nature, they don't have a good way of breaking this sort of like list function, this macro function that exists for Seeking Inferno, for the Flamebound, Shadowbound setup. And as a result, they're always going to be using this macro setup to play around it. And since they're using a macro setup to play around it, it just adds an extra annoying step for everybody in the race. Everybody in like Mythic rating and those who are trying to get into Mythic rating. And so for World First Raiders, it doesn't really make too much of a difference. They're the best in the world. They can hit an extra button if they need to. But for everybody else, it's another step in the equation that if you mistakenly hit your macro, if you're not paying attention to like your surroundings, you're not as easily able to handle this mechanic, and it adds another layer to the boss fights that your guild now has to deal with and your guild now has to contend with. And that's probably the most frustrating thing, is that It's all based off of the mechanics that they have specifically designed. How are you going to be able to very rapidly start clearing through some of these flame infernos as you're going out through boss progression? How are you going to be able to instantly sort who is receiving these debuffs, how you're going to be sorting out which of those players is going to resolve these mechanics first? Like, we're on day 1, for example, of Smolderon progression, as you can see right here. And you can even see how long it takes for people to be able to soak. I'm taking my own time. This is probably the first time I got hit by this mechanic. And then I'm 3rd on the list, even though I'm close, right? And so players that are far away should be delaying their cast of the use of the macro. And then players that are close, like myself at this point, should have been mashing it instantly. And since it takes a little bit of time to be able to learn and add into the equation, it just extends this longer and makes it more difficult, rather than just having the Weakauras on its own telling you what to do. It adds another layer to the equation for a mechanic that on its very head, you either have to be in voice and like constantly yelling over everybody, or the raid leader has to have their eye in the sky to actually tell who's affected by everything, and it becomes a massive pain. You can see in these early polls how we're trying to sort through which players do and do not have it, and also space out enough time so that everybody can deal with it. And as a result, players are still, once again, fighting up against this sort of aura system where they're accomplishing the very same goal at the end of the day. And aura is telling them which order that they want to make sure they're clearing their debuffs out. It's dictating how they want to be handling a mechanic over and over and over again. And it just becomes pretty much the same exact impact, but it's another layer of complexity for the average Mythic guild. For those who are trying to get into Mythic, you still are downloading an aura, you're still figuring out the order based off of the machine, the matrix, that's telling you what you want to be able to do. It doesn't really accomplish the goal that I guess Blizzard has actually set out when they've created these auras to begin with. There's other like positive sides where things like, Blaze or like Blaze in particular, you're not able to build out a mini map the way you would in like Archimond, where you could sort through where all the safe zones are, or have like a map that you stare at that shows how you want to move. Like, those things are actually good. But my beef with it is specifically the mechanics themselves, not whether it's a private aura or not. It's just the mechanics in themselves that are created that pretty much need to have a weak aura to be able to solve, unless you're some giga gamer race to world first. And even they are doing it because there's so many other mechanics that they have to deal with on the encounter, that having some of them that help you automate and help you take some of the thought out of how you deal with that mechanic are just infinitely valuable for high-end rating, and that's always how it is. So it's kind of a weird, frustrating thing that you have these exist. Firestorm, or like calling the meteors dropping onto players and how you want to place them around the room on something like Fyrakk makes sense, right? It's not so much having private auras exist, it's more so on how they're designing those mechanics in general. Having like Nimue, where the explosive seeds are on targets and everything. I believe that's one of the tank mechanics in the encounter that they have to deal with. It's not the blossoming bloom or whatever it is. Those things also make sense, and that's okay. Polymorph bomb, same thing on Council. Like, those things are okay. That way you're having to actually figure it out on your own on the fly. So having some private auras exist is fine. But if they want to keep on designing these mechanics where you need to be able to resolve them and somehow communicate with everybody in incredibly quick fashion, you're always going to be able to do that faster using a program than you are just hopping onto voice and hashing it out in that way. And at the end of the day, it comes down to encounter design more so than, gamers using the programs to automate all of the tasks that they have before them. We're seeing it now in the Race to World First, and when these auras eventually get released to the general population, I know there's Smolderon ones going around right now because my guild has them, but I'm sure that the Fyrakk ones are going to be coming around very soon as well, once the Race to World First is over. And when that happens, everyone's just going to use Weakauras to do the mechanics all over again. We'll be seeing. I will say I've been enjoying Amirdrassil. I just don't know how they're solving this war on Weakauras without first looking inwards at the encounter design. Let me know what you guys think about the whole private aura setup. Let me know what you guys have been enjoying for the Race to World First so far, and I'll probably be home soon after Thanksgiving weekend to be able to back gaming at my place. All right, thank you for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch y'all next time.